Hello, boys and girls. It's time for another story. I thought you'd like a story from India today. Our story is about a Dr. Jacob Chamberlain, and he spent most of his life in the country of India helping make the people well because he was a doctor, as well as preaching about Jesus to the people in India. Well, he'd been there a long time, and the government officials liked him, so they gave him some special benefits. I'm going to show you a picture of him now. But the government said, well, you're doing such a good work. And he was going to go on a journey that was going to take him all the way around India. And they said, we want to help you. So what they did was the government hired coolies, men that would carry either in their arms or on their heads or up on their shoulders all the supplies that would it take for this whole big group of people, the missionary, the ministers from India that were going with him, plus guides and the coolies. And the government also gave them soldiers to protect them as they went on down their way. Well, that was really nice because there were things to be kind of afraid of in India. Part of India is jungle, and so there could be bandits, there could be tigers. So it was good to have somebody to protect them. But Dr. Chamberlain knew that the person he wanted with him more than anybody else was Jesus. And Jesus had promised, wherever you go, I'll be there with you. So they had traveled for months, and they were going on their way, and they were going to get to the river, and there was supposed to be a boat right there waiting for them. So they had hurried very fast. Most of the people were walking. And the monsoon rains had come early. Monsoon rains are something that happens in a lot of the countries in the world. There may be no rain for weeks and weeks and months, and then it becomes monsoon season. And it rains and it rains and it rains. Well, this year, it didn't just do all that raining. It started flooding because the sky was putting down so much rain. It flooded the rivers. The rivers pushed the water back up the streams. The streams filled the creeks. And when it couldn't hold any more water, it bubbled over the banks. The Godavari River was 30 feet over its banks. The people in part of the areas were wading through water. That's how much water there was. And every step that Dr. Chamberlain and all his people with him took was through the muck. Muck, muck, rain and water everywhere. Not only was the doctor and all the people with him going through the mud, at the side of the path, they saw a huge footprint, the footprint of a tiger that was the size of a man's hand. In spite of all the mud, they quickened their pace because of that footprint. They knew the tigers were close, and they were hurrying on their way to the boat. Well, when there was no boat there, no boat to pick them up and take them like there was supposed to be, the doctor went into the village, and he talked to some of the men, and he said, "Hello, we've come to go on the boat down at the river? And they said, no boat. The boat was coming up the river, and it was fighting against all this extra water and the big current and everything. And now it's broken. It can't come. And he said, what are we supposed to do? Are there any other boats? No other boats. You have to go back the way you came. And then you have to take your machetes and you have to chop through the jungle. And then you have to go for 75 miles. And then you have to climb the bluffs. And then you'll be to some similitude of safety. 75 miles in the mud and the water. There was nothing they could do. So they started back. 75 miles. Well, all this time, Dr. Chamberlain was talking to the God of heaven. Please go with us. If there's some other way we can go, let us know. He was riding along on his horse. By now, they were along the area that led right into the jungle. The doctor, he could hear footsteps of animals going in the jungle just beyond where they could see. They were in tiger country. They were all frightened now. It was getting dark. The doctor decided that he needed to talk to God again. So he turned his horse around and he galloped to the back of that big column of people. He wanted to be alone with God. And when he got there, he didn't close his eyes, but he looked up to heaven and he said, "Oh, Father, haven't we been doing what you asked us to do? Haven't we told everyone that we've met about you? Haven't we been making the people of India well? Haven't you promised to be with us no matter where we are? Oh, please help me to know what to do." And then he heard a voice. No, it was not a voice like me talking to you, because none of those other people could hear it. It was a voice in his ear. And the voice said, "Turn to the left, go to the Godavari, and you will find rescue." He thought, is it the voice of God? Have I missed something? So he rode back to the head of the line where all the guides were. And he said to the guides, "How far is it to the Godavari?" That was a huge river. They said, "An hour." And then he said to them, "Are there villages there?" They said, "No, no villages for miles down the river." "Are there boats there for any reason?" "No boats, sir." Then he said, "Are there trees we could cut down, or is there dry wood there that we could lash it all together and we could make a raft and go down the river on it?" They said, "Oh, no. The trees, they're all these green jungle trees. If you cut them down and you throw them into the river, do you know what they do? They sink to the bottom. They will not float, no matter how many you hook together." Well, is there any hills there that we can camp on and we can build fires around to protect us from the tigers? No hills. It's all perfectly flat. And by now it's probably covered with water. Well, the doctor didn't know what to do. So he turned his horse around and he galloped the other way again. He got behind that column of people and he started talking to God again. But before he could say almost anything, there was that voice in his head again. Turn left, go to the Godavari, and you will find rescue. I must be missing something, he thought. So he rode up to the first group of men and he said, are there any boats at the Godavari? No. Is there any wood? Maybe it's fallen wood that we could make a raft. They said no. Even if there were, it would be washed away with the flood as it is. The Godavari is supposed to be 30 feet above what it ordinarily will hold. 30 feet. Boys and girls, look up here at my ceilings. They're almost 10 feet tall. If you put 3 of my living room on top of each other, you would have about 30 feet. That's a lot of extra water. Not only was the river full, the river was filling all the streams, it was filling everything and all that flat land. He didn't say any more. He turned around and he rode back again to the end of that line. Before he even got there, he heard the voice, more insistent this time. Turn to the left. Go to the Godavari. You will find rescue. And suddenly he knew it had to be the voice of God. It had to be. He poked at his horse and he started to ride and he rode all the way around that column. And he got to the front where the guides were and he said, halt! And of course they all stopped. Now the missionary had always been very kind and very gentle with them. But this time he said, I want you to turn to the left and take us to the Godavari right now. Well, they started to argue with him. But sir, if we go all the way to the Godavari, we can get there and there's no boats there, there's nothing to make a raft, and it'll get dark, and the flood water could come up and pull us out into the river and we'll all die. Besides, if we go all the way there, it's useless. We'll have to come all the way back again. He did something he'd never done before. He looked them in the eye and he said, he picked up his hand. He didn't even think about what was in his hand. He wore a uniform and he always carried a revolver, which is a gun. This one was about 14 inches long. And he didn't even think. He picked it up for emphasis, I guess, and said, you obey. I'm in charge and you will obey me now. And their eyes got really big. Yes, they thought they would obey. And then Dr. Chamberlain said, we will find rescue there. They all started going. Matter of fact, they were going much faster than they'd ever been. Now, he had not intended, he would never ever shoot anybody with this gun. This gun he used to protect his people if they were in the jungle. But they went on their way, and the pastors came back to him and said, kind of like, well, are you going to tell us what's there? And he said again, if we go there, we'll find rescue. Well, they started on their way, and the coolies started talking to each other, and the one said, he must know of something there that's going to save us. I heard him talk about rescue. You can't be rescued without something to rescue you. He must know what's there, but he doesn't want to tell us yet. So they started down that path through the jungle, down to that river. And as they were going, Dr. Chamberlain, he heard feet, the feet of animals going through the jungle by the path. And then when he looked over, he saw the big green eyes of a tiger. And then he heard them roaring. He was so frightened. But in his heart, he knew that it was God speaking to them and that God was going to give them rescue. He was going to save them from the tigers. Well, when they were about half an hour down that path toward the river, Dr. Jacob, he couldn't wait any longer. And I bet from looking at the pictures that his beard and his hair was flying behind him outside of his triangular cap. And he made his horse go, and he rode into the bushes all the way along that big, long column of people. And when he got to the river, he jumped off his horse. He kept a hold of him, and he looked this way, and he looked that way. Where was the rescue? Then he happened to look down, right in front of him, down the bank. There, tied to a tree along the bank of the river, was a huge flatboat, a boat big enough for all of them. He scrambled down the bank, and then he saw that there was 2 men on that boat. And he said, "What's this boat doing here?" I don't think he meant it unkindly, but the 2 men, they saw his uniform, and they thought he was a captain in the British India Army. And they said, "Oh, sir, we're so sorry. We know the boat doesn't belong here. It belongs down the river. But, sir, you wouldn't believe it. Last night, oh, sir, last night, all of a sudden, there was a huge wave that came up the river. We've never seen anything like it. And it pushed against the boat, and it broke the cables that held the boat to the mooring. And we started floating out into that swollen river with such a big current. We did everything we could. We tried to stop it. We tried to row it the other way, but it kept wanting to come to this side of the river, but it belonged on that side. Sir, we've tried all day to get it back where it belongs. We're so sorry it's here." Doctor, he looked at them, and he stood kind of at attention, and he said, I have authority to use any equipment that belongs to the government. And I am commandeering this boat to take us where we need to go, me and my men. And the men looked at him, and he said, and as for you two, I will pay you well when we get back to the other side. And I will write a letter to your supervisor telling him that it was no fault of yours that this boat is here. And one of the men said, Sir, it was just like something supernatural kept pushing it to this shore. The harder we tried to make it go the other way, the more it got pushed this way. And finally we gave up and it came into this little space and we tied it up on this tree, thinking that when the flood went down a little or the current got smoother, then we would take the boat back where it belongs. We know it's our job, but thank you, sir. Thank you. Dr. Chamberlain, he stood there and he thought in his head, who but God could send a wave so big down the river that it would actually break the cables from the mooring and send this big boat? Who would be guiding it to keep it to this side of the river so it would go in right where we had gone down to go to the river? Oh God. And he knelt right down there in the mud and he thanked God for taking care of him, for protecting him. He'd protected him from the floods. He had protected him from the tigers. And now he was going to bring him to his destination like he had promised. God is so good. Well, we know from history that he did make it on the rest of his journey. And it ended up years later that he wrote some books for boys and girls that contained all these stories about his life in India. We have a wonderful God. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week.